Dave Harding, Executive Director, Blue Devil Network, analyst, Duke Radio Network, heading to, I think, the most picturesque temporary home in college football. Duke at Northwestern tomorrow night. And it becomes a big game, not only for Duke, but for the ACC. Got to get Power 5 or Power 4 wins. Dave, how do you feel based on what you saw against Elon?
I'm feeling pretty good. I think Duke's off to a pretty crisp start. And when you look at opening games, one of the big things, obviously, to survey is how well or how focused the team was and did they shoot themselves in the foot all that often. And I don't think Duke did. Especially defensively. Got out with 16 TFLs. They were, there's so much talk coming into that game and into the season about how aggressive this group wants to be on defense. And, 16 tackles for loss, regardless of who your opponent is difficult to do. And we saw that defensive unit in particular play really clean, not many assignment busts, sound in the secondary. And again, I think that's rare. Even in like a scrimmage going into during the preseason, going into a game, you rarely see a defense operate as cleanly as Duke's defense did. So definitely a reason for optimism there. Special teams I thought were crisp. Also offensively, I think you're feeling optimistic because obviously you won the game. You were able to hit on some explosive plays. But I think the big reason for optimism, if you're a Duke fan, is they haven't even scratched the surface of what they're capable of doing. I'd say they left at least 200 yards receiving out on the field on Friday night with near drops where it's a long ball trying to stretch the defense vertically, and it just slipped through the receiver's hands by a matter of inches. So I know, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, but I think if there was a place where you look and see, an area where that cliche, the most improvement happens in a football season from week 1 to week 2, if you're looking for improvement, it's on the offensive side. It wasn't all that bad to begin with, but I think if they can put that chemistry together a little bit more, especially in the passing game, they could be really explosive.
Yeah, no, Dave Harding is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Back to the defense real quick. We'll unpack the offense in a second. To me, that was in some ways, like for people who didn't watch, Duke's explosive, like you talk about big plays on offense. I thought it was Duke's big plays on defense that really helped them because I kind of thought Elon they were kind of effective moving the football, but there were sacks and big plays on the defense that ultimately put Elon behind the chains and forced punts and whatnot. So I thought that their big play capability on the defensive side of the ball, and this is a team that had to replace everybody on the defensive line. I thought that was impressive.
I agree. It was only a 3-point total for Elon at the end of the night.
Yeah.
But I was impressed time and time again by their ability to stay on the field despite some of these massive negative plays.
Yeah.
And so you got to give them credit for kind of picking themselves off the mat over and over. But yeah, I mean, the defense was without question the highlight of the night, the big story, and the depth along the defensive line. To your point, you lose Jamion Franklin, Dwayne Carter up front, a few others in the transfer portal. What are you going to have? In the cupboard, I would say, is not empty at all. There's a solid, I'd say 2 deep along the defensive line of players that clearly understand the scheme. And it is a different defensive scheme than what we saw last year from Duke. They're not really hat reading. They're trying to get into a gap. Everybody kind of has one gap that they're focused on, and it's go attack that gap as hard as you possibly can. And you can see them buying into that. And I think they've got a group, maybe not when you look on paper, their heights aren't going to stick out to you. Weight might be a little bit lower than what would normally pop, but they're perfectly suited for what this scheme is asking them to do. It's really sell out and clog holes up front.
Dave Harding is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show at Dave Harding Jr. Jr. on Twitter, Executive Director, Blue Devils Network. The offense had a hard time running the football. Is that a concern of yours?
It is, especially when you kind of pair it with what Northwestern was able to do defensively. They only gave up, I think it was 40 yards on the ground to Miami, Ohio last week. So you've got a stout Big Ten defensive front coming or going on the road to play there. Elon played defense differently than Northwestern will. Elon sold out against the run.
Right.
They basically said, Duke, we're going to load the box, and you're going to have to hit on some of these deep balls to beat us. Duke was able to do that. And they were assisted, obviously, by the defense getting off the field so much, and the offense had a ton of opportunities at it. But for Duke to be successful this week and moving on through the rest of the season, I don't think they can afford to be one-dimensional. You brought Malik Murphy in. Everybody knows what kind of arm strength he has. The strength of the offense is in the wide receiver room with the depth that they have and the experience that they have there. But the offensive line, who in the spring was a big concern. They played the spring game basically without one, and were able to fill a lot of gaps, whether that was getting injured players back or getting some players that have contributed right away in the transfer portal. But they're going to have to shore some things up front. I thought pass protection was strong, but chemistry often talked about in the throwing game between the quarterback and the receivers. I think the chemistry up front for the Blue Devils between the offensive line and the running backs is something that we can see improve from game one to game two, where you saw a few times schematically maybe the play is designed for the running back to cram it in along the line of scrimmage, get north quickly, and instead decided to bounce, and vice versa. So I think a few slight adjustments there, and similar to what we said in the passing game, where if you can just get the ball to be a little different spot or have the receiver understand where Malik Murphy's trying to lead them a little bit better, you've got an opportunity to be really effective. I think that's where they are, and I expect them to have cleaned some of those things up heading into Northwestern, because Northwestern, interestingly, Adam, does not load the box. They're going to play with their D-line and linebackers pretty light box, put more assistance into the secondary. And so the Blue Devils, if they're not able to run, against a relatively basic front, it could be a long day.
Dave Harding is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. As an old offensive lineman, and you're not old, by the way, I'm probably twice your age, but as an old offensive lineman, how does that unit get better from week one to week two? Because it's not just at Duke. We could say the same thing about NC State, that has to be significantly better on the offensive line after their matchup with Western Carolina heading into the game against Tennessee. I'd say the same thing about UNC against Minnesota last Thursday night, even if they're playing Charlotte. So how does an offensive line improve from week one to week two?
I think a lot of people, when they think offensive line play, first of all, to go back to your point about being old, what if there's a fact that we could both be old, Adam? That's
no.
a concern.
Only one of us in this conversation is old.
Okay.
I know you.
I appreciate that. But to the offensive line play, people think it's a lot of just being physical. And that's definitely the majority of what you need out of an offensive line from a characteristic perspective. But, I'm just going to take Duke, for instance. I think they are a physical front. That's a group that gets off pretty well, good pad leverage. Then it comes into the technique piece of it and how long you're hanging on a double team, how quickly do you work up to a linebacker. And a lot of that happens with reps. And so you'll see an offensive line improve just in the technique element and the chemistry of understanding where to go, when to move, how much help somebody might need versus another person, understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of the people along the line so you can game plan more appropriately for that. That's how you see a group improve. And I don't think there's enough conversation also about how the running back factors in. They've got to understand those exact same things of, hey, the hole might not look like it's there, but as soon as the right guard moves up to the linebacker, it's gonna open up immediately. Everything looks jammed up for the initial 2 seconds of the play. Trust it, press in there, don't bounce to the outside because they've got a safety and the defensive end's there. Believe that lineman is going to work up to the next level, and that's when things open up. So there's a trust and a chemistry that can only be developed with reps. And, the unfortunate thing for Duke, and I think for a lot of these offensive lines across the country with the way the transfer portal is working and how these in the spring period, there's so much flux during that time that you lose out on a lot of the opportunity to build that chemistry and build that understanding from one player to the next along the front. And that really has an impact early in the season. At each game, you should start to see that improve.
It's a big game for Duke. Dave Harding, I appreciate your time, my friend, at Dave Harding Jr., Dave Harding Jr. on Twitter. You have the best pad leverage of any guest we have on this program.
I love it. I got to have hands in tight, too,
Yeah,
Strike
we all do.
With just a vicious nature. Yeah, okay. I think we're getting close to game time. I'm starting to feel it.
All right, put your helmet on, sir. I will talk to you very soon, my man. I'll talk to you later.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Dave Harding here on the Adam Gold Show. I'm really not sure what any of the last part of that meant.
Yeah, sounds good.